Ever since Europeans set foot in North America, farmland's been losing about 0.07 inches of soil every year. That's nearly twice the erosion rate the United States Department of Agriculture considers sustainable. What's the outlook? Well, opinions differ, but if nothing changes, there's just one way to describe it. Grim. In less than 30 years, U.S. soil could degrade so much that only 5% of the land will remain unaffected. Yes, the first thing that needs to change is farming methods, as they cause the most damage. But in the States, they've come up with a different, pretty unusual way to restore the land. Bison, the legendary animal of North America, is released onto barren soil, and then we start figuring out what happens next and why these hoofed giants suddenly turn out to be one of the ways to stop land degradation. Back in the day, this animal roamed North America in such huge numbers that in some places you could practically see one at every turn. Here's a map showing where bison lived across the continent before people arrived. Almost the entire area of what is now the US, a big part of modern Canada, and a bit of Mexico were home to these creatures. The region was even called the Great Bison Belt. Scientists say this area stretching from Alaska to the Gulf of Mexico used to be vast grasslands full of greenery, like this grass here or this one. In short, there was plenty of it. This grass was the perfect diet for bison, which is why they spread across such large areas. A huge number of animals lived within the Great Bison Belt until people started doing their thing in the area. To be more precise, when European colonizers arrived in the 1500s, the Spanish brought horses to North America. Seems like nothing special. Bison started living alongside horses. No big deal. Horses aren't predators that would hunt bison. That's true, but the spread of horses was welcomed by the plains. Indians. They got a way to move around that made it easy to chase herds and hunt bison. Much more often by the early 19th century, about 60,000 Plains Indians had between 300,000 and 900,000 horses, which let them hunt on an incredible scale. For example, in 1840, they killed around 500,000 bison for food and another 100,000 for trade in the East. On top of that, horses competed with bison for grazing, which also had a serious impact on the population of the animals. We're discussing today in North America, cattle like cows showed up and started spreading diseases that killed off bison. Plus, they were competitors too. By 1900, around 30 million head of cattle were grazing in the Great Bison Belt, pushing the bison out just like the horses did. And what happened in the end before humans arrived? There were huge numbers of bison in North America. No one knows exactly how many, since there was nobody around to count them. Then came people who could. They estimated that before the 1870s, about 60 million bison lived in North America. On this map, the lightest color shows the animal's range. Yeah, since people had been hunting bison for ages by then, their habitat was nothing compared to what it had been before Homo sapiens showed up. Still, they roamed a huge part of North America. Then the real slaughter began, and photos like this started popping up, showing that no bison ever crossed paths with humans without ending up in someone's sights. As a result, the range had shrunk to what's marked here in brown. But even after that, no one stopped killing bison, which led to the range being reduced to these black dots by 1,890. By that point, the American bison was a species on the brink of almost total extinction. In 1884, there were only 325 left. Just think about it, in just 20 years, the number of animals plummeted from 60 million to just 300. The near extinction of bison also harms nature, because the species is the key to the American shortgrass prairies. Bison, which scratched trees with their horns, prevented them from taking over the open meadows. When the animals grazed, they spread seeds. The bison also roll. Yeah, this is another feature that affects the prairies. When bison roll around in the dust or mud repeatedly, shallow pits form. Spring comes and the pits fill with water, turning into many wetland areas with characteristic vegetation. Where do the seeds come from? The bison carry them in their fur because of their large size. Decaying bison are an important source of nitrogen and phosphorus for plants. Bison also graze in large, tight groups, so their grazing creates a patchwork of grass of different heights across the landscape. This unevenness is important for many animal species. Some prefer short grass, while others like tall grass. But all of this became a thing of the past, with the near-total disappearance of American hoofed animals. Short grasses were replaced by less resilient tall ones. They didn't cope well with the climate conditions in the Great Bison Belt, which is why many areas lost their grass cover altogether. The large cattle that replaced North American bison grazed uncontrollably on the green meadows and had a negative impact on the local ecosystem. This became another reason for the once green prairies to become bare, together with the development of agriculture. This led to the fact that on the southern plains of the U.S., more than 4,600 square miles of pasture were reduced to about 695 square miles by 1926. In other parts of the U.S., the situation wasn't much better. This was already an ecological disaster of unbelievable proportions. But another one followed that shocked everyone due to the destruction of pastures. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s happened, blowing away 850 million tons of topsoil, which was carried into the Atlantic Ocean. Since then, everyone realized that it was time to change things, including increasing the bison population, which used to serve as protectors of the health of America's green pastures. One of the first places where they began to restore the population of American bison was Yellowstone National Park. Originally, only 25 individuals found refuge there, not many. And it's hard to picture that number growing several times, but the park pulled it off. Coalitions of biologists, activists, ecologists, simply enterprising people, and government representatives have been working constantly on restoring the population. As a result, by 2022, there are about 5,900 individuals in Yellowstone Park. Obviously, the state of the land and ecosystems in the park is supported in many different ways. After all, it's one of the most famous parks in the U.S. Still, no one downplays the role of the bison population in maintaining the health of the local landscape. Let's head over to the Chicago area to the Midwin National Tall Grass Prairie, with the bison being wiped out. In the past, the land here probably wasn't ever anything alive, and to top it off, the park's on the site of a former U.S. Army munitions factory, which doesn't exactly leave the surrounding land in great shape. However, right now, there are 9 square miles of prairies, diverse plant communities, birds and animals. Since 1996, traditional land restoration methods like planting, mowing, burning, and herbicides have been used here. But in 2015, bison appeared near Chicago, judging by how the park looks. Now, bison are a great solution that's helped restore the area and continue to keep it in good shape. But this is just the beginning. The prospects of land restoration using bison and other methods are so appealing to researchers that the experiment started near Chicago is planned to continue for 20 years. That is, until 2035. One of the most active groups restoring the American prairies is the American Prairie Foundation, or APF, with its private project, American Prairie, a nature reserve in Montana. By 2024, the reserve's habitat spanned over 526,000 acres, with 14,000 acres transferred to private ownership and 385,000 acres of leased state land, APF, buys and rents land to connect it and create a continuous wildlife corridor covering almost 3,212,000 acres. To restore the land in this area, a variety of methods will be used, including the already mentioned bison, as many as 10,000 of them. The project participants initially said that its implementation would be long and very difficult. Now everyone agrees with that, because there are some intermediate results. The land restoration effort began in 2005, when a couple of dozen bison were brought to Montana as of 2025. American prairie is home to between 900 and 1,000 animals roaming over 59,000 acres. Yes, it's not a lot, but even now, bison are making, though not a big, but still an important contribution to the restoration of the Montana prairies, which over the years, without the legendary American animals, have seriously lost their fertility. It's worth noting that the project is also focused on ensuring that the herd is genetically strong, meaning it'll make a big contribution to the overall bison population. Restoration in North America and the long-term survival of the species in 2023 American prairie took in 80 animals from a bison herd in Colorado, as well as from another herd in Montana. As a result, in 2024 calves were born that are a mix of several bloodlines. Now let's move to Kansas. You could say it's the very heart of the Great Bison Belt, a region that's seen both prairies and the loss of bison, which caused land degradation. Here stands the KZA Prairie Biological Station, 13 square miles of local tall grass prairies in the hilly Flint Hills area, co-owned by Kansas State University and the Nature Conservancy. About 30 years ago, scientists began a long gunning experiment to figure out how bison and smaller cattle can shape the local prairies. A herd of bison consisting of 120 individuals was left in one part of the research station. They lived there year-round. In another part, the cattle grazed from April to November, after which they were taken off the fields and given extra food during the winter in other areas. There was no grazing at all. It was, let's say, a simulation of the conditions in which both bison and cattle completely died out, due to the total extermination. By humans here, the land was periodically burned to simulate the fires that occurred on the prairies before the arrival of those who caused the most harm to bison. European settlers, a question may come up here. Why imitate something that harms forests and everything tied to nature every year? Turns out it's actually necessary, because no matter how odd it sounds, burning plants once led to a rise in the bison population and generally helps plants grow. This is because recently burned areas are rich in nutrients, which attract bison that eagerly work on restoring them. There's also information that Native American tribes influenced the ecology of the Great Bison Belt and expanded the low grass plains through controlled burns. So researchers at K Prairie used the same tactic for their experiments after the bison and cattle were assigned to specific areas and a grazing freeze zone was set up. The scientists scoured the land and counted all the plants they could find. Over the years, a pattern emerged where the bison grazed the number of 4 dominant grass species decreased as the animals ate them at the same time as the grass was eaten. Other native prairie plants took root as a result over 3 decades. The number of local plant species in areas where bison grazed increased by 86%. Compared to areas without grazing. In other words, bison almost double the wealth of the prairies. And what does this tell us? The scientists who worked on the research for this project answer many meadows in the central Great Plains have significantly lower plant biodiversity than they did before the mass extermination of bison. The return of local megafauna in the form of bison will help restore the biodiversity of the meadows. And let's not forget about another type of cattle. They also took part in the experiments, and just like bison contributed to the increase in biodiversity. However, plants grew by only 30% compared to land with no grazing. This result doesn't quite reach the 86% seen with bison. So it's safe to say, restoring and maintaining healthy prairies is all about bison, and more bison. Besides, all these studies, scientists found out that thanks to the bison, the prairie flora was even able to survive the severe droughts of 2011 and 2012. It's noted that some local species suffered in the years leading up to the drought. But thanks to the bison, they bounced back moreover because of these legendary hoofed animals. The local species population kept growing. You get it right. Bison are also saviors when it comes to something that's got a lot of scientists and environmental groups worried these days. The effects of climate change, basically bringing more bison back to North America, is a key part of restoring lands that lost their original nature because of human activity. The recovery is happening, maybe not at a fast pace, but it's happening nonetheless. Bison now occupy less than 1% of their historic range, and their numbers are nowhere near the 60 million that roamed before the mass slaughter began. Right now, there are fewer than 20,000 bison and herds protected on federal, tribal, or private conservation lands. However, there are really a lot of restoration projects out there just based on what we talked about today. And that's just a small fraction of all the efforts many states have. Several bison restoration projects going on at once. So looking ahead, bringing back the full Great Bison Belt with its lush green prairies doesn't seem all that far-fetched. Yes, desertification of North America's pastures can be stopped by restoring bison and other animal populations. However, the positive impact of hoofed animals on struggling lands can be even greater if they're not just released randomly, but introduced according to a plan. That's exactly what Alan Savory believes. He spent most of his life researching this, so there's good reason to trust the strategy he developed. Look, these are the leaves that fall from the trees, like clockwork every year when cattle graze on certain areas. They trample them into the ground, after which biological decomposition takes place, and a fertile soil cover appears on which a wide variety of plants can grow if livestock don't graze. Whatever falls to the ground breaks down slowly through chemical oxidation. Under the sun, this isn't good for fertile land, and according to Savory, it leads to the desertification of vast areas. What's he? Suggesting herding livestock, including bison, to restore the lost lands. But this isn't just any grazing. The scientist proposes organizing animal movements with absolute control and planning. It's called holistic planned grazing. With this strategy, grazing is planned to imitate the way wild animals moved around in the past, before humans arrived. Overgy grazing of plants is kept to a minimum, while the soil gets the most out of the hoof. Trampling, which breaks down old plants, and manure, which acts as a natural fertilizer. Pulling this off is no easy task. First, you need to figure out how exactly the animal should move across the land, so that turning barren soil into fertile ground is even possible. Second, holistic planned grazing is a complex strategy that requires a huge number of steps to implement. First, livestock farmers need to divide their land into grazing sections, then set up fences or other barriers to separate the zones. When creating a grazing plan, they should decide how long the animals will stay in one spot, where they'll move next, and when and for how long they'll return. Besides that, they need to figure out what kind of landscape they want to create and how much feed the land should provide during the planned period. And yes, all of this needs to be done, taking into account factors that affect the grazing plan. This includes, for example, the time when grazing areas will be covered with snow or prone to fires, when and where ground nesting birds appear and lay their eggs, and a lot more. Does it actually work? Many experts have their doubts, but the Savory Institute clearly shows that the scientists' approach indeed turns barren land into something better. Here, for example, the trees are like separate objects not connected to each other by greenery, and there's almost no vegetation between them, but here you can already see an area where holistic planned grazing took place. No, the land hasn't turned into the most fertile zone on our planet, but the differences are noticeable. Even to the naked eye, the trees don't seem separate because there's much more greenery growing between them. Bison are already doing a good job of restoring the land. But if we graze them according to Savory's strategy, the effectiveness of the transformation could likely increase. The resilience of the land will improve too long. Story short, bison bring only benefits,